the second something.
Second chat.
Yeah. So we thought it would be good to, from this place, kind of set a foundation of like what we are.
Our thoughts are on health.
Our definition of what kind of health is,
Yeah.
and how we approach helping people with health, and how that differs from, I guess you'd call like a mainstream viewpoint of health. So from like just right from the get-go, our viewpoint on it is it's much more say integrated, or I know some people like to use the word holistic. I feel like that gets overused, but it is like
descriptive.
Using everything being intertwined, like no impact you have on the physical is not going to, it's always going to be reflected in the mental, emotional, and vice versa. So to think that you can, and anything you do physically is also going to affect other things physically as well. It's not, it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
So any action that we're taking has other reactions happening to it that maybe sometimes we haven't even considered. But when you start to look at health as being completely integrated like that, you start to think that way, you're more aware to see what those interactions are, what kind of impact the things you're doing have, both positive and negative, which I think is important, because as we've worked with people, we can sometimes see like people starting to head down a path, maybe we don't quite, it's not beneficial to them, or not at that point anyway, and realizing like, oh, there could be an impact based on some of the training that they're doing, some decisions they've made, possibly nutrition-wise, that's leading to that. And so just being able to look at the bigger picture like that, I feel like makes it a little easier for us to like, oh, let's change a couple of things, and because those could be impacting, rather than like, no, that has nothing to do with it. It's like, no, it could have something to do with it. We don't know for sure, but those are some things we've changed recently, and you're seeing a change in this area. So let's maybe tweak that and see if that starts to help.
Yeah.
So
I think that what we're gonna get into is it in some ways simplifies health, because then you learn how not to listen to so many different places and people on what health is, and you learn to truly be able to listen to yourself.
Right.
So it's more simple, but in a way it's not as easy, because then you don't have that manual. You have to like take responsibility, and you have to put in the work to actually truly hear like what your body, mind, and emotions are all like kind of saying, and how they're interacting.
Right. So I think there's certain things that are going to be kind of like almost fundamental principles that you don't really see change between people, but they're not super specific. So the principle may be the same, but how it gets applied to each person is a little bit different.
Right.
As an example, like this could be I guess considered almost a hot button topic, but just the immune system being like, we know that there's certain things that positively and negatively impact the immune system. So for example, sleep. A lack of sleep is going to negatively affect the immune system. So to think that, well, I don't sleep really well, and I don't know why I get sick all the time, like there's definitely going to be a correlation there, and we know that there's going to be, that poor sleep is going to affect your body's immune system. So we definitely is going to be something you need to look at.
So that can be one of those fundamentals, but it's going to be applied differently, because some people will need more or less sleep than others, or they'll need, maybe
for them it's not the sleep.
sleeping.
There could be some other issue that they're having issues with their immune system. But yeah, so
but it's something that everyone needs, but is going to be applied differently, depending on the person.
Right. Yeah, and so there's certain things like when someone comes up like, oh, we found out that this particular food or whatever, this thing is like, if you do that, it's going to it's this wonder cure type of thing, and you're going to be immune to all. It's like, no, it still comes always back to the basics of like, how are you actually keeping the body healthy, both physically and mentally, emotionally, and the more that you build up those core pillars of health, the more resilient you're going to be against physical disease, mental, emotional disease, all of those.
And that food may be the magic cure for one person, because maybe that was the one, that's like that key log thing that they were missing that they needed to build on everything else. But that doesn't mean it's going to be the same for every person.
Right.
So
I think, so first off, just to kind of establish, and we kind of mentioned this in the first one, but we see the health of the physical body and the person's also like mental, emotional health as being intertwined to the point that you cannot separate them out. You can't make
Right.
decisions in one area and assume that it's not going to affect the other. They will absolutely affect each other. None of those decisions are made in a vacuum. None of the actions you take are in a vacuum. So with that, kind of saying that as kind of the foundation, if you will, of how we're gonna like look at things today. What we do with people, as far as when we're training them, is we're accessing all of those more from a physical side and through movement.
right.
But as we do that, we'll start to, as we find possible physical imbalances or unhealth, whether that be in the way the person moves, whether that be in pain, whether it be in not being able to lose weight, not being able to gain weight, we can start to run into, I guess you want to call them like walls or roadblocks that we can see are very much tied to something on the emotional side or mental emotional side.
Right.
And so then that, once we've been able to start to, we can uncover that, the person can start to address those as well. So you need to have health on both sides of that equation to start to actually see the results on the physical, but then also vice versa oftentimes too.
Yeah.
On the emotional side, there can be a total block there. If someone's trying to access and help that person there and they haven't done anything on the physical side, it can be much more difficult, if not sometimes even impossible.
Right. So the more turned off someone is to feeling their emotions, the more issues they're going to have really connecting to different parts of their body, different muscles, things like that. And oftentimes when you start to actually get those muscles to wake up and turn on, you see them able to actually start to feel certain things as well. So yeah, they're all very connected, and so we feel like that plays a huge part in, or it's a mirror of your health.
So with looking at health this way, what we try to help people do is help them to actually understand what's going on with themselves. So I think we've kind of, as a society, at least Western society, we've come very much more like we like to just go have an expert.
Right.
Sometimes it's an expert. Tell us what's going on with us. What do I need to do to fix this? Just tell me what's the magic pill.
Give me the
what's
3
my name?
steps.
Yeah, so I can just get this fixed because I don't know what's going on. And I think part of that is because of the way we've looked at probably science and all of that here in Western culture, but also partly too, another aspect of Western culture is we've kind of like shut off, I think, our ability to actually communicate effectively with our body, or to listen to the signals that are actually built into our body to let us know there's a problem. And so we tend to just kind of go blasting down the road until we get to a certain point like, oh, I'm really in pain, or I can't digest food at all, or I'm exercising and I'm eating well and I can't lose weight, what's going on? And so it's like, oh, okay, there's a problem, when there is signals all along to tell us that we were headed down that path, but we
just don't know how to hear them.
Yeah.
We don't know how to feel them. So that's a big part of our, I guess, the way we look at it is that if a person can start to understand what their own body is saying and how their body is affected by food and how their body is affected by supplements and movement, then you can kind of get rid of a lot of the other stuff. Like it's not as necessary for you to chase after all of those things because you know how those things affect you, and that is true health if you can understand that. So learning how to take one step at a time and start to listen to the signals that are given there, and then as that happens, you start to be able to address the next layer and get the signals from that. So we had talked about sleep.
Right.
Starting with sleep, like if you're getting really good sleep, I mean, I think all of us are aware of how sleep affects you like mentally and emotionally. If you get really bad sleep, you feel emotional and you feel.
But I don't know
like,
if most people know to what extent, how much better they can feel from getting good sleep because they're
Right.
so used to not getting good sleep.
But if you get bad sleep for you,
yes.
even if you are used to getting 3 hours of sleep at night, say you get one really bad night of sleep, you recognize, like, you feel emotional, you feel jittery and weird and sluggish.
Jittery from all the caffeine you're pouring down
Right,
to try to stay awake.
exactly. So, go ahead.
Pause for a second. That's a good place for me to edit. I just want to check it and make sure it's recording fine. Yeah, okay. Where are we at time-wise? 10 minutes. Could you just have your phone here? Just keep track that we don't go like past another 20 minutes.
Do you want me to set a timer?
Or just, yeah, look at it. 4:34. Okay, so 4:55. Okay. All right. So yeah, so sleep is a good example of an area where I think a lot of people don't understand the signals their body's sending them unless you said, like, if they get something that's bad for them, it's like, oh, I got bad sleep for me. But sleep as a whole in the U.S. is horrific.
It's really bad.
It's really bad, and we tend to think it's kind of accepted. It's kind of just like, oh yeah, well,
it's almost a badge of honor sometimes.
So stupid.
Like, oh, I got such bad sleep. I was so busy, you know.
I didn't
such
go to bed
bad
to 2
sleep.
because I was up working.
I had like 5 cups of coffee, and I'm only 3 hours into my day, and it's like, that's not okay. That's not good.
We'll come back to caffeine at some point. It's an enabler. Anyway, but yeah, so it is. It's kind of like, I don't know, again, if it's a Western culture thing of like, oh, listen, look how hard I work, or whatever it is, we've gotten used to it.
Yeah.
We've gotten
I
used to
don't
doing
have
that.
enough time to rest because I'm such a hard worker.
Yeah.
So busy and productive.
So that is.
But not productive if you're not sleeping.
Yeah. Think you're productive because you work all the time, but you're actually not getting a whole lot done.
Yeah.
So that is actually for us, one of the foundational things that we want our clients to look at is sleep. And there's some of them, they're not quite ready to do that. They're like, well, just have me exercise and things will get better. It's like, all right, well, let's start you moving. And then when they start to like, okay, but I want more results, like, oh, how's your sleep?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How's your sleep? And it's not, the concepts for starting to improve sleep are pretty simple, but they can be really hard for people to execute because they're so not used to doing those. But when they start to get some of the results from it, it can be pretty shocking to them sometimes. Of like, oh wow, I feel almost like a different person.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah. So another one would be food and digestion.
Right.
The two of those obviously very interlinked. So.
And interlinked with sleep.
Right, interlinked with sleep. So they're still connected to other parts of the physical, and then also over to the emotional too.
Definitely.
So, just the impact as far as, and it's something we can talk about more maybe in another one, but the impact of food as far as protein and carbohydrates and fats and how they affect your state, as far as being able to rest, being able to stay alert and get work done, and then being able to, participate at a high intensity level with physical activity.
Right.
All three of those have a different type of impact on that. So that is as far as like trying to clear things up so that somebody can actually understand what is my body actually saying at this point as I get into this activity, as I'm trying to go about work at the office throughout the day. Why can't I focus right now? So as we start to, another thing that we'll do when people are ready is have them start to try clearing the signals on the food, so that they know like, oh, okay, this food is actually affecting me at this way at this time, and I know that now because all I ate was that particular type of food, and I saw the result right afterwards.
And not like one kind of food, but like you're talking like protein, fat, carbs,
Yeah, that specifically.
And then as you clear signals there, you recognize how you're digesting food.
Right.
And then your emotional state can have such a huge part to play in how you're digesting.
Right.
I mean, like, if you're eating big turkey dinner at Thanksgiving and your family starts fighting and screaming and throwing food, like, chances are that food's going to sit like a rock in your belly. But if you're super relaxed, you probably are going to digest much more easily. So, lack of sleep can start to, make you feel emotionally unstable, which will make you not digest as well, which will keep you awake more at night because your
More
body
anxiety. When
and
you're
it's
anxious, you
causing
don't digest
inflammation
well,
when you're eating badly and you're not digesting
and you're not sleeping.
and you're not sleeping.
And inflammation is
Sounds
not
like-
the only symptom of that, but it is a big one for both of those.
And that sounds like a recipe for getting sick.
Inflammation is like one of the main markers of like chronic disease
Mm-hmm.
for almost every chronic disease. So, yeah, and then digestion, that's a big one that I it's interesting to me how few people realize how badly they digest food.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even just like, am I getting the right kinds of food? Like people will be like, oh, I want to just break down and get my macros right, and then that way I'll start losing food. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, losing weight. It's hopefully not losing food, losing weight. But it's like, okay, but if your inflammation is still high and you're anxious the entire day, and you actually, the foods you chose to eat today are ones that your gut biome actually can't digest,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't actually get what you thought you got. Like the
Right.
macros you thought you got actually don't even mean anything because you
Right.
couldn't break the food down because you don't have the gut biome to do it anyway, and you were also anxious and you're inflamed, and so you just basically pushed yourself even further out of whack. But you thought you were doing a good thing.
Right.
So that can sound like it's even more complicated, but the reality is as you start to really pay attention to those things, you're going to start to figure out pretty quickly, like when you can get in tune with like, and to me anyway, I feel like knowing whether or not you're digesting food okay is not that hard. You just have to kind of slow down a second and be like, oh, I feel horrible after I ate that. It's just sitting in my stomach, and I can tell it's sitting there for a long period of time. It's like, well, yeah, you're not breaking it down.
Right.
So
if
you
you're
start
super
to-
gassy, if you're, like, yeah.
So that's another one.
Those-
It's like
those
you
are
start
good
to realize like,
indicators.
oh, okay, that is a food that doesn't agree with me, and somebody could be telling me that's the, like you were talking earlier, like that's the miracle, the food that I have to eat. It's like, well, no, maybe you don't have to. So that is another big part of this, is going back again to, it's like, what is right specifically for you? Yes, we're trying to get each person to a similar place, but their path
But you
there
might
is going
have
to be
to take a
different.
different path. Yeah, you hear so much about things like, I mean, just some of this stuff that has been popular through the years. Kale. Kale and everything was so popular for a while. Turns out that's really hard to break down unless you have fat-soluble fats.
And it's
With
also
it.
high in oxalates, which is not necessarily.
And that can be
anything
hard
negative.
for a lot of people to break down. So now it's being villainized.
Yeah.
But it's a food, it's a plant.
Right.
So there are going to be some people who do great with it. So, or like, eat tons and tons of vegetables, go mainly eating vegetables or mainly vegetarian. But maybe for some people at this point in their life, that's going to be more harmful than anything because they don't have the gut biome to break that down.
I think that'd be interesting to get into that more, like do one like primarily on like food and nutrition at some
Yeah,
point.
definitely.
But understanding the function of food and then understanding how it works for you, and that's why it's like there's so many confusing diets out there. There's
Yes.
been like everything from now the carnivore, the caveman diet, and I think Atkins is kind of in that range too. To on the other end of the spectrum of like low fat, all vegetables and carbs, and it's like
You've got
it's
keto, you've got
right.
vegan.
And somebody's like,
you've
oh, it
got-
works great for me. You should try it. Oh, this works great for me. You should try it. And that person, is like, I've tried all these things and none of them work. It's like, well, because you don't actually understand what's happening with you right now. And you need to get a handle on that to understand how you can actually heal, actually get strong, actually come back towards that balance of health.
Yeah.
So instead of being at the extremes, which I think that's another too, of like understand if you're living out at the extremes, that's where like, I think if we bring the body into a healthy place, it naturally starts to, if we give it a healthy environment, it's going to naturally start to balance itself out.
Mhm.
And it, like the body wants to be healthy, but you have to put it into the right, basically environment or the right state, on the inside and on the outside,
Right.
to get to that place. And so with each of these, like balancing them out, like not going into the extreme, like people will always want to do something super extreme, like, oh, I'll do this and I'll get it back to, and then you might need extreme measures at some point to like kind of start that journey back towards health. But
Usually when we go towards extremes, there's a lot of fear involved.
Right.
And then that's, you recognize that's very much an emotional
right.
issue.
And you can't force the body into change. You have to give it the right, again, it's like it's the right environment for
Right.
it to start to actually heal. If you're overweight, for it to be able to start losing weight. If you're underweight, to be able to start gaining weight. If you can't gain muscle, to be able to start gaining muscle. If you have gut issues, for the gut to start actually to repair itself and to heal. I don't think the body, for the most part, maybe there's some extreme situations with certain conditions, but even with those, I don't think that the body has lost its full capacity to actually heal itself. It's just that we've put it under so much strain through a negative environment for itself, for that particular person's body, that those functions that are natural to healing are gone. And yes, as we get older, that starts to decline, it's not as effective, but I don't think that the body ever completely loses that ability until maybe we're really, really, really old, as that function declines. So when people are kind of like feel like, oh, it's hopeless, I can't, there's nothing can fix it. It's like, no, you just haven't found like what that block is, that one that you have to address, so that you can actually, and sometimes it's a combination of a few different things, but I feel like normally there's one that you hit, and then you start to peel the layers back. Then there's other ones, but you got to get.
It's never just
first.
one thing. It's you find that first thing, and then you learn how to listen for the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing, and then you keep going with that, and you keep becoming a master of your own body and your own emotions.
Right.
And then you truly are seeking after health in the right way. So.
And I think you have to be able to do that for yourself to help other people do it. So as you learn to do that, to listen to the signals from your body, it's pretty amazing what the body can. It knows. It's like, this is not beneficial to me, and this, and it will tell you, but you have to learn how to listen.
Yeah, you really do. I feel like it's like a relationship between your physical body and like the spiritual. Instead of just trying to shove your body into something or shove your emotions into something, if you kind of just step back a little bit and like listen, it sounds so hokey and ridiculous, but it really is amazing how they communicate with each other, but you actually have to let that happen. And then you understand what your body needs. And that's been, I think, the craziest thing for me is to, like...
It's like any relationship. It's like you have to actually be able to listen. And so I think we tend to not view our body as like, it's like, well, it just does what I tell it.
Right.
It's like, no, it's trying to communicate back that there's problems, or that there's things that are good. But we tend to just be like, do this, body, do this, do this. I'm going to force you into this box. You're going to fit the template that all these scientists have told me works. And it's like...
And it turns out most of us don't like to be controlled. So even when you're trying to control your own body, it doesn't really respond that well. It doesn't really like it.
I love it. You communicate with it.
Yeah, you really do.
Whisper sweet nothings in its ear. So we mentioned sleep, food, and digestion, and obviously the one that most people come to us start with, because they just want to actually start moving, because they understand that they're not, and that's actually been bad for them. And that is something that I do feel like in the U.S. at least, people at least kind of get that concept of like, if I'm not exercising, that's bad.
Right.
Like sitting too much, being too sedentary is bad. So that's good. That doesn't mean that people go out and do it, but at least there is kind of an understanding of that. And so that being movement.
Right.
So that movement, I can't remember who originally said movement is medicine, but it really is. We were made to move. If
you stop moving, you are going to stop moving.
Yeah.
So movement is very important.
Things that are living, on the animal side of things, maybe not so much plants, but animals, they move. And they have to move to be able to stay alive.
And humans were made to move.
Yeah.
And if you don't move, there's just a whole host of health issues that come with that. So, and movement really does affect you emotionally as well. Right.
So, with the movement and how that ties into, obviously, with your sleep and your food and digestion on the physical side, all of those interacting, and none of those decisions actually ending up being in a vacuum, but then that tying over to the emotional as well. So we kind of mentioned the food affecting the emotional state, but also movement too. And so that's one of the things that it's important for us, especially as we coach people, understanding better and better how different types of movement and exercise can affect someone emotionally and physically, and not letting them get stuck into a rut that's actually not only harming them emotionally, mentally, but also eventually, and then it's going to affect them physically as well. And we did see that quite a bit, not bad mouthing CrossFit, but like at times people who did CrossFit that didn't understand that what they were doing is they'd start to get into this rut where they would be like, you'd see the people like they were the ones that always wanted to do they liked the long hero workouts or whatever. They had their one that they liked, and they would only come to the gym when it was like those type of workouts. They'd start to get stuck in this rut of like, well, I know I'm good at that, and so that's what I do. But or maybe they'd also avoid the movements like, oh, that one hurts or whatever, and so they'd start to avoid certain things. But then they start to get themselves in this pattern where they're just only doing certain movements or only certain types of workouts, and they'd start to get discouraged. And I mean, sometimes that was also because of injury, but they start to get discouraged, get depressed. They start to not show up at all, and they weren't getting that fullness of like what movement can actually be. So, and I think you see that too with people who are like super hard, like into one sport. And we talk about how like strength training is really important for people in sports to stay balanced, right? To not have these weird movement imbalances and end up like ripping up a shoulder or an elbow, maybe if they're playing baseball or any of these sports where they're moving at high velocity. And I think that's true, but I think the other part of that too is just you need to move differently sometimes. Like it feels good to go out and like to not always just be locked into like, this is my thing, that's all I do. Because it's true, like you probably started doing it because you love it, but you're going to lose that love after a while and think that, well, but I've got to get that back, and you try to find it by just doing the same thing again.
And how many people do you hear about who burn out on a sport and then they stop moving, period?
Right.
Like how many people, especially like middle-aged men, come in very overweight, in a lot of pain, and it's like once they stopped whatever their sport was in college, they didn't do anything anymore because they were burned out. And so now there's also this emotional block against even moving anymore because they know where they used to be, and they burned out from it and they got injured, and then now they don't even want to move anymore. And there's almost like this fear of that. So, I mean, that's an example of how the physical can also affect the emotional. And then the emotional, that block about moving again, affecting the physical. Now they don't even want to do anything.
Right. So you end up getting a place where it's like you kind of do have to force a first step and walk with them through that so they can start to get some positive feedback from what they're doing, like both physically and emotionally. Like, oh, this actually feels good again.
Yeah.
Oh, I actually can do this. I am capable of it. Right. And it's something new, so then they don't feel like that same was like, oh, this is what I was used to do. It's like, oh, this is a new skill. It's different.
Yeah.
I don't have to feel like, because it can be exhausting to be like, all the time to be like, I'm the expert, I'm the one that's really good at this, I have to maintain this level all the time.
Just kidding.
Yeah. But it is, it's like, so you try to keep yourself to this level all the time instead of being able to go in and be like, hey, I'm just a student again.
Yeah.
Because there's something refreshing about that, to be able to go like, I know nothing about this, and I get to start from ground.
I mean, really, you can only go up at that point. So. And
it's fun, you're learning, you're doing new things.
Kind of stretches your brain a little bit, it's like.
I think that's where a ton of people that went to CrossFit originally was because they were athletes in high school, and they either burned out or they didn't have the opportunity to do it anymore, but they missed that outlet. And they're like, oh, it's something that's new, and I get to test myself in new ways, and it's really hard at first because I'm not used to doing these movements.
So it's exciting and it's new.
And so then the mental part of that's so intertwined, obviously, with the emotional, and I mean all three of them intertwined with each other, but also just allowing people to be able to, like, now that you have, hopefully as you start to sort some of these out, clearer signals of like, oh, here's the feedback I'm getting from my body, and then being able with the, I guess, more the rational mind to like process like, oh, well, these are actual decisions I should be, making at this point for me. And being able to see it's like, that's different than what someone else would have told me when they're like, oh, you should do what I have everyone else do. That's, fits in whatever your category is. It's like, because I'm actually not in the same categories as those people, because there's ways that I am different. And so being able to like sort those out and be like, okay, now I actually understand.
Now you have like
what's best for me.
A foundation as you've been clearing the physical signals, clearing the emotional signals. Then your brain has more like experience with, oh, here's what it means to feel good physically. Here's what it means to feel good emotionally.
Right.
Here's how they work together. So now it kind of has like, it's had like these positive reinforcements. It knows this works for me. This makes me feel good. Yeah. And so then it can actually use rational thought to help you
make better decisions.
Because if you are very emotional, how many of us have made decisions like really bad decisions
Right.
when you're in a very emotionally unstable place in life. Or like physically, you know, if you're not sleeping well, like you don't think as well. And so your thoughts, your mental side is now kind of compromised. It's not able to work to the best of its abilities because you have these signals coming in that are throwing it off and not, so it's not very accurate.
Right. There's a function to each of those emotions that's good. You just have to make sure that you can understand.
You understand why and don't just act out of it.
Right. It doesn't just kind of, because it's easy to take actions that like might make you feel a little better for the moment because you haven't actually been able to like get to the root of like, okay, oh, this is why I'm feeling anxious.
Right.
This is why I'm feeling discouraged or depressed, and actually deal with the root issue rather than be like, well, let's have a cookie or
like
let's
eating a pint of ice cream when
Right.
you're feeling really emotionally unstable. There's a reason for that emotion.
Right.
So learning how to find the root of that emotion instead of just
temporary
taking care of it temporarily.
All right. Another equipment malfunction, but we're just going to kind of go ahead and wrap this one up there. But the main takeaway kind of from it, like obviously, because I rambled on for a while, is just kind of, okay, so how do you start to apply that? And that's something we'll get into more down the road. But the main takeaway being that at the end of the day, you're going to be the one that's going to be able to understand actually what's happening with your body better than anybody else.
Right.
If you understand how to listen to the physical, emotional, and mental signals that your body is sending you, hey, this is what's going on. So starting to take some simple steps to start to clear those signals. We'll kind of get into some of that stuff as we go along. And then being able to, like, as you progress forward from there, it starts to become a lot easier to understand, like, oh, okay, here's what I need to do movement-wise. Here's what I need to do nutrition-wise, because I know where I'm trying to get to, and these are going to be steps that are going to be productive towards that end. And these are ones going to be counterproductive. And I can tell because as I do one or the other, I can tell, see, it's like, oh, that's pulling me further away where I'm trying to go from to, and that's actually moving towards where I want to go.
You'll actually be able to feel how the different things affect you. And ultimately, like our goal for everybody we work with is for them to become the expert on their own body, their own health, whether it's physical health, emotional, and mental health. We want you to become the expert. Because then that puts the power into your hands and you're not just sort of at the mercy of whatever new fads come out. You're not at the mercy of whoever is giving you information. You know how those things affect you, so whatever you try, you can feel how it affects you. So
there you go. That's the main takeaway. We'll wrap this one up there and then hopefully do another one here
get
soon.
a little deeper into some of the specific things. Yeah.
Have some other hopefully fun, interesting, controversial topics that we can talk about too. All right, we'll cut it there.